When we try to understand why a narcissist engages in intimate relationships with such apparent indiscrimination, we first have to fundamentally reframe what intimacy actually means to them. Because if we assume they're operating from the same psychological framework as someone capable of genuine connection, we'll never understand the pattern. We'll be perpetually confused by choices that seem self-destructive, reckless, or simply inexplicable. The key insight is this for the narcissist. Physical intimacy is not an expression of connection, desire, or mutual attraction. It's a transaction. It's a means to an end. And once you understand what ends they're trying to achieve, the indiscriminate nature of their behavior suddenly makes perfect sense. Let me explain what I mean by transaction. When most people engage intimately with another person, there's a complex interplay of factors: genuine attraction to that specific individual, emotional connection or the desire for it, mutual vulnerability, the sharing of pleasure, the creation of intimacy. The person matters. Their specific qualities, their particular presence, who they are as an individual, all of this is central to the experience. But the narcissist is operating from an entirely different framework. They're seeking something that any number of people could provide. They're not looking for you specifically. They're looking for what you can do for them in that moment. And what they're seeking varies, but it generally falls into several categories: validation, control, regulation of their internal state, or proof of their desirability and power. Think about what this means practically. If intimacy is about obtaining validation, about proving to themselves that they're attractive, wanted, desirable, then the specific person becomes almost irrelevant. What matters is that someone said yes. Someone chose them. Someone found them compelling enough to be intimate with. The person could be anyone, as long as they fulfill that validating function. If intimacy is about exerting control, about demonstrating their power to seduce, to possess, to have access to another person's body and vulnerability, then again, the specific individual doesn't matter. What matters is the exercise of power itself, the proof that they can make something happen, that they can override someone's boundaries or better judgment. If intimacy is about regulating an internal state, providing temporary relief from emptiness, anxiety, or fragmentation, then it's functioning almost like a drug. And when you're seeking a pharmaceutical effect, you don't develop a relationship with the substance. You just need it to work. The narcissist in this mode is seeking sensation, distraction, a temporary sense of being real and embodied. Any person who can provide that experience will do. This transactional framework explains something that often baffles partners of narcissists, the shocking lack of standards or selectivity. You might discover that the person your narcissistic partner was intimate with is someone they themselves describe as unattractive, unintelligent, or otherwise. And you think, why would they risk our relationship for that person? Why would they choose someone who's clearly not as accomplished, attractive, or interesting as I am? But you're still thinking in terms of choice based on genuine preference. The narcissist isn't choosing based on who the person is. They're choosing based on availability, opportunity, and whether that person can fulfill the immediate function. It's not that different from someone who's hungry eating whatever food is available. You don't develop elaborate preferences when you're just trying to fill a void. This is also why narcissists can maintain multiple intimate relationships simultaneously without apparent internal conflict. For someone capable of genuine connection, this would create cognitive and emotional dissonance. How do you reconcile intimate connection with multiple people? How do you manage the competing emotional investments? How do you navigate the ethical complexity? But for the narcissist, there's no dissonance because there's no real connection. Each person is fulfilling a function, providing a form of supply, serving a purpose. They can compartmentalize easily because they're not emotion. A lie invested in any of these people as whole individuals. They're engaging with what these people can do for them, not with who these people are. This transactional nature also explains the narcissist's ability to be intimate with people they don't even particularly like. You might discover they were involved with someone they openly criticized, someone they found annoying, someone whose company they didn't even enjoy outside of the intimate context. And this seems utterly incomprehensible until you realize they weren't relating to that person. They were using that person's body and availability to meet a need that had nothing to do with the person themselves. It's a profoundly objectifying way of relating, though the narcissist would rarely recognize it as such. They might even convince themselves they're experiencing attraction or connection in the moment because they've learned to perform the appearance of these feelings. But there's no depth beneath the performance. No genuine regard for the other person's subjectivity, their experience, their humanity beyond what they can provide. And this is why any currency works. The narcissist doesn't need gold. They'll take whatever is available because they're not actually seeking treasure. They're seeking to fill a register, to make a transaction, to obtain something that anyone with the requisite anatomy and availability can provide. The person is incidental to the function. When intimacy is divorced from connection, anyone becomes replaceable. Because you were never seeking a person in the first place. But the transactional nature of the narcissist's intimate encounters points to something even more psychologically revealing. Because while intimacy serves various functions for them, one of the primary functions is the accumulation of evidence in an ongoing internal case. They're trying to build the case for their own desirability, their power, their significance. The narcissist, remember, has no stable internal sense of worth, no coherent self-esteem that exists independent of external validation. They're constantly, exhaustingly trying to prove to themselves that they matter, that they're special, that they're worthy of attention and desire. And every intimate encounter becomes a piece of evidence in this case. This is why the numbers matter to them in a way that seems almost adolescent. They might keep mental tallies, might reference their body count with a kind of pride, might collect intimate encounters the way some people collect achievements or trophies. If you're thinking about intimacy as connection, this seems bizarre and frankly pathetic. But if you understand it as evidence gathering, it makes perfect sense. Each person who says yes to them, who finds them attractive enough to be intimate with, who gives them access, this becomes proof. Proof that they're desirable. Proof that they have power. Proof that they can attract, seduce, possess. The actual experience of the encounter is almost secondary to what it represents in their ongoing effort to construct a sense of significance. This is why the conquest matters more than the connection. In fact, the connection would almost interfere with what they're seeking. Real connection would require vulnerability, reciprocity, the possibility of being rejected for who they actually are. But conquest, the ability to make something happen, to override hesitation, to successfully seduce, that's pure validation with no risk of genuine exposure. Watch how the narcissist talks about their intimate experiences. When they're being arded, often there's a quality of collection, of acquisition, rather than genuine enthusiasm about the person or the experience. I had her. I closed the deal. I can get anyone I want. The language reveals what's actually happening psychologically. These are possessions, achievements, notches in a belt, not relationships with human beings. And this is where the indiscriminate quality becomes particularly important, because it's not just that anyone will do, it's that the more varied, the more numerous, the more impressive the collection, the more convincing the evidence becomes. If the narcissist can attract people of different types, different demographics, different levels of conventional attractiveness or social status. This proves their universal desirability. They're not just attractive to one type. They're attractive to everyone. There's also an element of compulsive proving that happens here. Because the narcissist's internal emptiness is constant, the need for validation is insatiable. One encounter doesn't actually fill the void or resolve the question of their worth, so they need another and another and another. Each provides a temporary sense of being desired, be powerful, being significant, but it fades almost immediately, requiring the next fix. This is why narcissists can be intimate with someone and then immediately begin pursuing the next person. It's not that the first encounter was unsatisfying in any conventional sense. It's that it didn't actually resolve the underlying existential crisis that drove them to it. The emptiness returns, the question of their worth resurfaces, and they need more evidence, more proof, more validation. Think about how different this is from how most people experience intimate relationships. For someone capable of genuine connection, intimacy creates a sense of closeness, satisfaction, perhaps even a period where they feel emotionally full and don't need to seek validation elsewhere. The encounter nourishes something, at least temporarily. But for the narcissist, each encounter is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. It might look full for a moment, but the emptiness returns immediately because nothing external can actually address the internal deficit they're trying to remedy. So they remain in constant pursuit, constantly needing to prove their desirability, constantly seeking evidence that never quite convinces them for long. This also explains why narcissists often pursue people who are in relationships, who are seemingly unavailable, or who initially reject them. Because if they can successfully seduce someone who's committed elsewhere, someone who said no, someone who's supposed to be unattainable, that's even more compelling evidence of their power and desirability. The difficulty of the conquest makes the validation more potent. It's not about the person at all. It's about what successfully seducing that person proves about the narcissist. And this is why they can be so persistent, so willing to invest time and energy into pursuits that seem disproportionate. They're not pursuing a relationship. They're pursuing proof. There's something profoundly sad about this when you really sit with it. Because what the narcissist is seeking, proof of their worth, evidence of their desirability, can never actually be obtained through these encounters. External validation cannot resolve an internal deficit. No amount of people saying yes can fill the void left by a coherent sense of self. So they remain trapped in this compulsive cycle, collecting evidence that ever quite convinces them, accumulating encounters that provide momentary relief, but no lasting sense of worth, pursuing validation that evaporates as soon as it's obtained. And the people they're intimate with, they're not really there as full human beings in the narcissist's experience. They're witnesses, validators, evidence. Their subjectivity, their own desires and vulnerabilities, their humanity. All of this is peripheral to their function in the narcissist's psychological economy. This is perhaps the most dehumanizing aspect of the narcissist's indiscriminate intimacy. Not just that they'll be intimate with anyone, but that in being intimate with anyone, they're not truly intimate with anyone. Every encounter is fundamentally about them, about their need for validation, about their compulsive effort to prove something to themselves that cannot be proven through another person's body. When you're using intimacy to prove your worth, everyone becomes evidence and no one becomes real. But there's another dimension to the narcissist's indiscriminate intimate behavior that goes even deeper than validation, seeking, or evidence gathering. And this one touches on something more visceral, more desperate, the narcissist's profound disconnection from their own body and their experience of an internal void that's almost unbearable in its emptiness. Let me explain what I mean by this, because it gets to something fundamental about the narcissist's relationship with physical sensation itself. The narcissist exists in a chronic state of what we might call dissociation, a disconnection from their authentic self, their genuine feelings, their embodied experience. Their entire psychological structure is organized around avoiding contact with a core self they experience as defective or worthless. But this defensive dissociation comes at a tremendous cost. They're cut off from the felt sense of being real, of being alive, of inhabiting their own body in any grounded way. This creates an experience of emptiness that's difficult for those of us who don't live with it to fully comprehend. It's not just emotional emptiness, though that's certainly there. It's a kind of existential void, a sense of not quite existing, of watching life happen from behind a glass wall rather than actually living it. The narcissist goes through the motions, performs emotions, acts out what seem as appropriate, but there's very little authentic felt experience underneath. And this is where physical intimacy enters as a particular kind of solution, however temporary. Because intimacy, at least in the moment, provides something the narcissist desperately needs, sensation intense enough to break through the dissociation, physical touch, arousal, the overwhelming nature of intimate encounter. These create moments where the narcissist actually feels something, where they're anchored in their body, where they experience themselves as present and real. It's not unlike the way some people use other intense physical experiences to feel alive. Extreme sports, physical pain, high-risk behavior. The intensity of the sensation cuts through the numbness, provides temporary relief from the emptiness, creates a brief sense of being embodied and actual. And here's the critical point. If this is what you're seeking from intimacy, not connection with another person, but relief from your own inner void, then the person becomes completely irrelevant. You're not looking for someone. You're looking for sensation. You're looking for an experience intense enough to make you feel real for a moment. T explains something that often shocks partners when they discover the extent of the narcissist's indiscriminate behavior. The encounters are often completely mechanical, devoid of any genuine passion or even pleasure. The narcissist might be intimate with someone and seem utterly disconnected during the experience, going through motions that look more compulsive than pleasurable. Because they're not really seeking pleasure in any conventional sense. They're seeking the sensation of feeling something, anything that breaks through the chronic numbness of their dissociated existence. And that sensation can come from intimacy with anyone. It doesn't require attraction, connection, or even basic regard for the other person. This also explains the often compulsive, addictive quality of the narcissist's intimate behavior. Like any other attempt to manage an internal void through external means, it provides temporary relief but no lasting solution. The sensation fades, the dissociation returns, the emptiness reasserts itself. And so they need another encounter, another moment of feeling real, another temporary reprieve from the unbearable experience of being cut off from themselves. There's a tragic quality to this when you really understand it. The narcissist is essentially using other people's bodies as a form of self-medication, trying to treat a profound psychological wound through physical sensation. But it doesn't work. It can't work. Because the problem isn't a lack of physical stimulation. It's a fundamental disconnection from self that no amount of external experience can remedy. And the people they're using in this way, they're not partners, not even really participants in a shared experience. They're instruments, vehicles for sensation, means of temporarily escaping the void. The narcissist might perform interest in them, might say things that sound intimate or connected, but the internal reality is one of profound aloneness. Even in the most physically intimate moments, The narcissist is alone with their own desperate attempt to feel real. This is also why the encounters can be so varied in nature, so indiscriminate in terms of context or circumstance. The narcissist might engage in ways that seem random, impulsive, or even self-sabotaging. They might pursue intimacy at completely inappropriate times in risky situations with people who are clear, lie unsuitable. None of this makes sense if you think they're seeking pleasure or connection, but it makes perfect sense if you understand they're seeking relief from an internal state that's becoming unbearable. The compulsive quality often intensifies during periods when the narcissist's defenses are particularly strained, when they're facing failure, loss, or circumstances that threaten their grandiose self-image. The void becomes more intense, the dissociation more pronounced, and the need for sensation that can cut through it becomes more desperate. This is why you sometimes see escalating patterns of increasingly indiscriminate behavior during times of stress or instability in the narcissist's life. There's also a way in which this use of intimacy to manage the void becomes cyclical and self-perpetuating. Each impulsive encounter, each indiscriminate choice, each moment of using another person as an anesthetic, it deepens the narcissist's disconnection from any possibility of genuine intimacy, reinforces the pattern of relating to others as objects rather than subjects. It makes the authentic connection that might actually address the underlying emptiness less and less accessible. So the narcissist becomes trapped in a pattern where the very behavior they're using to escape the void actually ensures they remain in it. They're seeking to feel real through encounters that require them to remain fundamentally disconnected from genuine feeling. They're trying to escape emptiness through experiences that can only provide temporary sensation, never actual fulfillment. And all the while, they're moving through a series of human beings who believe they're engaging in something mutual, something shared, perhaps even something meaningful, never knowing they're serving as a temporary anesthetic for someone else's existential crisis. When you're using another person's body to feel momentarily real, anyone with a pulse becomes sufficient because you're not seeking them, you're fleeing yourself. Now, we've talked about why the narcissist engages indiscriminately from their own internal perspective, the transactional nature, the validation seeking, the attempt to escape the void. But we need to address something darker and more strategic when the narcissist is in a primary relationship with you. Their indiscriminate intimate behavior serves another crucial function. It becomes a weapon, a tool of control and devaluation that's all the more effective precisely because of how indiscriminate it is. Let me be very clear about this, because it's one of the most psychologically devastating aspects of being in relationship with a narcissist. The lower they set their standards with others, the more it communicates to you that you're not special, that you're easily replaced, that your commitment, your loyalty, your sacrifice, none of it means anything. Think about what happens when you discover your narcissistic partner has been intimate with someone you perceive as clearly less than you in various ways. Someone less attractive, less accomplished, less interesting, less of whatever qualities you believed made you valuable to your partner. Your first response might be profound confusion. Why would they risk our relationship for that person? Why would they choose someone so obviously inferior? But you're still thinking this is about choice based on preference. You're still operating from the assumption that your partner's intimate behavior reflects genuine desire or attraction. And that's exactly what makes the devaluation so effective. Because what the narcissist is actually communicating through their indiscriminate behavior is this: you're not special. Everything you thought made you valuable to me, your depth, your loyalty, qualities, none of that matters. I'll be intimate with anyone, regardless of their qualities, which means your qualities are irrelevant. You could be anyone, are anyone. This is profoundly destabilizing. It undermines your sense of significance in the relationship. It makes you question your own value. And crucially, it puts you in a position of competing for a place you should never have to compete for. Competing not even with someone remarkable, but with anyone and everyone, because your partner has demonstrated they have no standards, no selectivity, no particular regard for who they're intimate with. The indiscriminate nature is the point. It's not collateral damage. It's the mechanism of devaluation. If the narcissist were being intimate with someone you could recognize as genuinely special or remarkable, you might understand it as genuine attraction to an exceptional person. You might think, well, they met someone extraordinary and were swept away. That would be painful, but it would at least make psychological sense. But when they're intimate with someone clearly unsuitable, someone they themselves might even criticize or demean, someone you know they don't even particularly like, that sends a different message entirely. It says, this isn't about finding someone better than you. This is about demonstrating that anyone will do, including people far less remarkable than you. Your specialness is an illusion. You're fungible, replaceable, common. This keeps you in a constant state of insecurity and hypervigilance. You're never safe, never secure, never able to trust that your commitment and your qualities matter. Because if your partner will be intimate with literally anyone, then no amount of being a good partner, no degree of loyalty or attractiveness or accomplishment on your part provides any protection or security. The narcissist knows this. Perhaps not always consciously, but they understand the power dynamics they're creating. They understand that keeping you destabilized and insecure makes you more manageable, more desperate to prove your worth, more willing to accept unacceptable treatment in hopes of finally being chosen as special. And there's another layer to this weapon. The indiscriminate behavior forces you into the impossible position of either accepting it, which destroys your self-respect, or constantly confronting it, which casts you as jealous, controlling, insecure. The narcissist gets to position your reasonable boundaries around monogamy or your pain about betrayal as evidence of your dysfunction rather than their betrayal. They'll say things like, "It didn't mean anything. Why are you making such a big deal about this? You're so insecure." And that phrase, "it didn't mean anything," is particularly insidious because they're telling the truth in a sense. It didn't mean anything to them. None of it means anything. But they're using that meaninglessness as a defense rather than recognizing it as evidence of their pathology. The fact that it meant nothing to them, that the person was interchangeable, that it was completely indiscriminate, this should be horrifying, not exonerating. But the narcissist presents it as if their lack of genuine connection or regard somehow makes the betrayal less significant. I don't even care about that person, so why do you care? As if their emotional disconnection from their own behavior absolves them of responsibility for its impact on you. This creates a reality where you're simultaneously being told you're overreacting to something meaningless while experiencing the devastating message that you yourself are equally meaningless, equally replaceable, equally just another body in an interchangeable series. The indiscriminate nature also serves to isolate you, because when you try to explain to others what's happening, it can sound almost absurd. They were intimate with someone they don't even find attractive. People who haven't experienced this dynamic might not understand how that's actually worse, how the indiscriminate quality is precisely what makes it so dehumanizing and destabilizing. And the narcissist's behavior often escalates in its indiscriminate quality over time, especially as you become more bonded to them. Early in the relationship, they might maintain some appearance of standards. But as your investment deepens, As you become more entangled, the message becomes clearer. Your significance is an illusion. Your special qualities are irrelevant. You're as replaceable as anyone else because everyone is replaceable. This is psychological warfare conducted through intimate betrayal. And it's all the more effective because most people can't quite believe someone would weaponize intimacy in this way, would strategically use indiscriminate behavior to destabilize and devalue their partner. We want to believe that intimate betrayal is at least about genuine desire, genuine attraction to someone else. The calculated, indiscriminate quality is almost too cruel to fully accept. When they'll risk everything for anyone, they're telling you that you were never anything special. And that's not collateral damage. That's the message. But perhaps the most fundamental reason for the narcissist's indiscriminate intimate behavior, the one that underlies all the others, is this: they lack the internal psychological structures that would create genuine selectivity in the first place. Let me explain what I mean, because this gets to something essential about how different the narcissist's internal world is from someone with a relatively integrated sense of self. When most people make decisions about intimate relationships, there's an entire architecture of internal guidance systems at work. You have values that inform your choices, beliefs about commitment, integrity, respect. You have genuine preferences based on attraction that's not just physical, but emotional, intellectual, spiritual. You have concern for consequences, how your choices will affect others, how they align with who you want to be. You have the capacity for guilt and shame when you violate your own values or harm others. And perhaps most importantly, have regard for the other person as a full human being with their own subjectivity, their own experience, their own dignity. All of these internal structures create what we might call natural selectivity. You don't sleep with just anyone because there are multiple internal checks and balances that guide your behavior. Your values say no. Your concern for consequences says no. Your empathy for how this might affect others says no. Your genuine preference for specific qualities in a partner says no. Your sense of self, respect, and integrity says no. But the narcissist doesn't have these structures, or they have them in such an attenuated form that they don't actually function as meaningful guides for behavior. Let's go through them one by one. Values. The narcissist's values are entirely situational and self-serving. They don't have the kind of internalized moral framework that creates consistent behavioral boundaries. They might espouse certain values when it serves them, but these aren't deeply held convictions that actually constrain behavior when no one's watching. Genuine preference. We've already discussed how the narcissist's intimate choices aren't based on authentic attraction to a specific individual. But this reflects a deeper reality without a coherent sense of self. The narcissist doesn't have stable, genuine preferences about anything. Their likes and dislikes shift based on what serves their needs in the moment, what impresses others, what reinforces their grandiose image. Concern for consequences. The narcissist's relationship to consequences is fundamentally different from someone with an integrated self. They either believe rules don't apply to them, or they're confident they can manipulate their way out of consequences, or they're so dissociated from future implications that the present moment is all that exists. The ability to consider, if I do this, then that will happen, and I'll have to live with that outcome. This requires a continuity of self over I'm that the narcissist doesn't reliably have. Capacity for guilt. This is perhaps the most important missing structure. Guilt is what we feel when we violate our own values or harm someone we care about. It's an internal signal that says, this action is inconsistent with who you want to be. This causes damage that matters. But the narcissist has either a profoundly attenuated capacity for genuine guilt, or their guilt is so intolerable that it's immediately defended against through rationalization, projection, or denial. Without the capacity to feel authentic guilt, there's nothing to create an internal no based on moral considerations. The question isn't, is this right? The question is only, can I get away with this? Will this serve my needs? And finally, empathy, the ability to genuinely consider another person's experience, to imagine their pain, to care about their well-being independent of how it affects you. The narcissist's lack of empathy means that one of the primary reasons most people exercise selectivity, concern for how their behavior affects others, simply doesn't operate. When you put all of this together, what you have is someone navigating in intimate relationships without any of the internal guidance systems that would create selectivity. They're operating purely on the basis of opportunity, impulse, and whether something serves their immediate needs. There's no internal structure saying, even though I could do this, I shouldn't because it violates my values, or because it would hurt someone I care about, or because I would feel guilty, or because the consequences aren't worth it. This is why trying to appeal to a narcissist's better judgment, their values, their concern for you, or even their concern for themselves is so futile. You're appealing to structures that either don't exist or are so underdeveloped that they can't actually regulate behavior in any meaningful way. It's not that the narcissist is choosing to be indiscriminate in some deliberate, conscious way, though the behavior certainly serves their pathological needs. It's that they lack the psychological equipment that would make them discriminate. They're missing the internal architecture that creates the experience of, I want to, but I won't, because that pause, that internal liberation, that ability to override impulse based on values or empathy or concern for consequences, it's simply not there in any robust form. This is also why education or appeals to reason typically don't change narcissistic behavior. You might explain to them how their indiscriminate behavior hurts you, violates trust, damages the relationship. They might even intellectually understand what you're saying and agree in the moment. But that intellectual understanding doesn't translate into behavioral change because the internal structures that would support that change don't exist. It's like trying to explain to someone without a sense of smell why they should be more careful around gas leaks. They might intellectually understand the danger, but without the sensory mechanism that would alert them to the problem, the understanding remains abstract and doesn't actually protect them. The narcissist operates in an intimate landscape without the internal compass, the warning systems, the value structure, or the empathic capacity that would create genuine selectivity. They're navigating entirely by external factors, opportunity, likelihood of being caught, immediate gratification, what serves their need for validation or sensation or control in that moment. And this is perhaps the most sobering reality about narcissistic indiscriminate behavior. It's not something they're choosing to do despite better judgment. It's something they're doing because they lack the internal structures that would prevent it. The behavior isn't a moral failing in the conventional sense. It's a manifestation of profound psychological deficits that no amount of explaining, pleading, or reasoning with them will address. Without the internal structures that create conscience, empathy, and self-restraint, indiscriminate behavior isn't a choice. It's simply the absence of anything that would create discrimination.